Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about what your life would have been like as a medieval peasant. And spoiler alert, it would have made your worst Monday morning look like a spa vacation in the Maldives. We're diving deep into the daily reality of being at the absolute bottom of the feudal food chain, where your biggest life achievement might be surviving to see your 30th birthday without losing all your teeth to scurvy or getting trampled by your lord's horse. But before going any further, why don't you drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, whether you're trying to fall asleep after a long day or just need something to keep you company on a late-night drive. It's genuinely fascinating to know who's out there listening to me ramble about medieval misery at ungodly hours. So picture this. You wake up in the year 1200 and something, and congratulations, you've just been born into what historians politely call the lower social stratum. What they really mean is you're about as important to medieval society as that one sock that disappears in the dryer, except somehow even less useful. Your parents took one look at you and thought, well, at least we have another pair of hands to work the fields, assuming the plague doesn't get them first. And honestly, that was probably the most optimistic thing anyone would ever say about your future prospects. You know how sometimes you complain about your commute to work? Well, your commute is about 15 feet from your bed to the field where you'll spend the next 14 hours bent over like a human question mark, pulling weeds that seem to grow back faster than your hope for a better life. Your house, and I use that term very loosely, looks like someone took a shed, hit it with a hammer a few times, then decided it was good enough for human habitation. The walls are made of wattle and daub, which sounds fancy until you realise it's basically sticks and mud mixed with whatever the local animals decided to contribute to the construction project. The roof is thatched, meaning it's made of straw that's about as waterproof as a screen door on a submarine. When it rains, and trust me, it rains constantly in medieval Europe, because apparently God had a sense of humour, your ceiling becomes a very inefficient shower system that drips muddy water onto whatever you're trying to keep dry. Your floor is dirt, not like decorative dirt or artisanal dirt, just dirt. The same dirt that the chickens walk on, that the pigs roll in, that you occasionally have to use as a bathroom when the weather's too bad to make it to the communal latrine pit. Speaking of which, let's talk about your bathroom situation, because medieval sanitation makes a gas station restroom look like the Ritz-Carlton. You've got a communal pit that everyone in the village shares, and it's exactly as charming as it sounds. It's like the world's worst social media platform, except instead of sharing your thoughts, you're sharing, well, you get the idea. The smell emanating from this pit could probably be detected from space. It's the kind of smell that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment, which in your case is literally just being born in the wrong century. Your daily schedule starts before dawn, because apparently medieval roosters were even more obnoxious than modern alarm clocks. You wake up on what can generously be called a mattress, but is actually just a sack stuffed with straw that's probably older than your grandmother, and definitely home to more insects than a nature documentary. You share this bed with your entire family, because privacy is a luxury that won't be invented for another few hundred years. Nothing says, "Good morning," quite like waking up with your brother's elbow in your ribs and your sister's foot in your face, all while trying to ignore the fact that someone definitely had beans for dinner last night. Your breakfast is bread. Not good bread, not even mediocre bread. This is bread that looks like it was made by someone who had heard bread described to them once by a person who had never actually seen bread. It's dark, dense, and has the texture of what you'd imagine eating a rock would feel like if rocks were somehow less appetizing. This bread is made from whatever grain didn't get taken by your lord, which means it's usually barley or oats mixed with whatever else was lying around. Sometimes that includes sawdust, because apparently medieval bakers looked at perfectly good wood shavings and thought, you know what, this needs to be in someone's digestive system. Now let's talk about your career prospects, which are about as varied as the menu at a restaurant that only serves different types of dirt. You're a peasant, which means your job description is basically Do whatever your lord tells you to do, and do it with a smile, even though you have no idea what smiling is because you've never had a reason to be happy. Your primary occupation is farming, and medieval farming makes modern farming look like playing video games in comparison. You don't have tractors, you don't have pesticides, you don't even have a reliable calendar to tell you when to plant things. You just sort of wing it and hope for the best, which explains why medieval crop yields were about as consistent as your internet connection during a thunderstorm. Your farming tools look like they were designed by someone who had never seen actual farming, but had heard it described by a drunk person in a tavern. Your plough is basically a sharp stick attached to whatever animal your lord was generous enough to let you borrow, assuming you can convince said animal to cooperate with your agricultural ambitions. Most of the time, you're pulling the plough yourself because oxen are expensive and you are not. So picture yourself harnessed to a wooden contraption, stumbling through a field that's more rocks than soil, trying to create straight furrows while your neighbours watch and probably place bets on how long before you collapse. The seeds you're planting have about a 50-50 chance of actually growing into something edible, because medieval agriculture operated on the same principle as throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, except instead of spaghetti it's your entire food supply for the year. You're farming in strips, because apparently medieval people looked at the concept of property ownership and decided to make it as confusing as possible. Your land is scattered around the village in random strips that make about as much sense as a jigsaw puzzle that someone's toddler has been chewing on. But wait, it gets better. You don't even own this land, you're basically renting it from your lord in exchange for working his land for free several days a week. It's like having a job where you pay your boss for the privilege of working, except somehow even less fair. This system is called feudalism, and it's basically medieval capitalism. Except instead of pretending everyone has equal opportunity, they just openly admit that some people are born to be miserable, and others are born to watch them be miserable from the comfort of a castle. Your lord lives in said castle, which is basically a giant stone middle finger, pointed at everyone who has to work for a living. He spends his days doing lord things like hunting, eating meat that isn't 90% gristle, and making decisions about your life without consulting you because apparently your opinion on your own existence is irrelevant. When you're not farming, you might be doing other exciting peasant activities like repairing roads, which in medieval times meant throwing rocks into holes and hoping they stayed there. Or you might be building walls using your bare hands and whatever tools you can improvise, because power tools won't be invented for another few centuries. Sometimes you get to participate in the exciting world of medieval construction, helping to build your lord's new addition to his castle, while you continue to live in what amounts to a slightly more sophisticated burrow. Nothing builds character quite like spending your days making someone else's life more comfortable, while yours remains a constant struggle against the basic laws of survival. The workday ends when the sun goes down, not because you're done with your tasks, but because candles are expensive, and your lord isn't about to waste money lighting your way so you can continue being productive. So you stumble home in the dark, navigating by memory and hoping you don't fall into any of the various holes, ditches, or animal traps that dot the medieval landscape like the world's least fun obstacle course. Let's talk about food, because medieval cuisine makes prison food look like a 5-star restaurant experience prepared by Gordon Ramsay's more talented older brother. Your diet consists primarily of bread, which we've already established is basically edible cardboard, and something called pottage, which is a soup made from whatever vegetables didn't die, rot, or get eaten by insects before you could harvest them. This pottage has the consistency of wallpaper paste and the flavour of disappointment mixed with whatever herbs you could find that probably won't kill you. It's the kind of meal that makes you understand why medieval people had such short lifespans, because after a few years of eating this, death starts to look like a reasonable alternative. Meat is a luxury that appears on your table about as often as unicorns appear in your backyard. When you do get meat, it's usually from an animal that was already on its way out, because healthy animals are far too valuable to waste on people like you. This meat has been preserved using salt, which in medieval times was more precious than your annual income, although here there seem to be historians saying that it wasn't a luxury. Either way, the result is something that tastes like someone took leather, soaked it in ocean water, then left it in the sun until it achieved the texture of a hockey puck. Your vegetables come from your own garden, assuming you have the time and energy to maintain one after working your lord's fields all day. These vegetables look like they've been through a war, because they basically have. They've survived medieval weather, medieval soil, medieval pests, and medieval farming techniques, which means they're tougher than most medieval people. You eat with your hands because forks are apparently too sophisticated for peasant dining. Spoons exist, but they're usually made of wood and have the same life expectancy as a mayfly in a hurricane. Your knife is the same one you use for everything else, from cutting food to cutting rope to performing amateur surgery on yourself when you inevitably injure yourself doing peasant things. Speaking of amateur surgery, let's discuss medieval healthcare, which makes WebMD look like the pinnacle of medical science. When you get sick, and you will get sick because medieval Europe is basically one giant petri dish of communicable diseases, your treatment options are limited to praying, bleeding, or consuming whatever the local wise woman suggests, which is usually some combination of herbs that may or may not be poisonous. The local physician, if your village is fancy enough to have one, learned medicine from books written by people who thought the human body was controlled by 4 humours, which sounds like a medieval sitcom, but is actually their explanation for why people get sick. This doctor shows up to treat your fever carrying tools that look like they were borrowed from a torture chamber, because apparently medieval medical instruments were designed by someone who confused healing with causing maximum discomfort. Bloodletting is the cure for everything, because medieval doctors looked at sick people and thought, you know what this person who's already weak and dying needs? Less blood. It's like treating dehydration by removing all the water from someone's body, except somehow less logical. If you're really unlucky, you might need surgery, which is performed without anesthesia because pain medication hasn't been invented yet. The surgeon's idea of sterilization is wiping his tools on whatever cloth is handy, which is usually the same cloth he used to wipe his nose 5 minutes earlier. Dental care consists of pulling out teeth with pliers when they become too painful to ignore, which happens frequently because medieval dental hygiene makes not brushing your teeth for a week look like obsessive oral care. Your teeth, if you still have any by age 30, look like a graveyard that's been hit by an earthquake. They're various shades of brown and black, with gaps that could house small animals. Toothbrushes won't be invented for centuries, so you clean your teeth by chewing on twigs, which is about as effective as it sounds. Personal hygiene in general is a concept that medieval people approached with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for root canals. Bathing is considered dangerous because apparently medieval doctors thought water could seep through your skin and mess with your internal humours, which again sounds like a comedy show but was actual medical theory. You bathe maybe once or twice a year, whether you need it or not, and trust me, you always need it. The rest of the time, you just sort of marinate in your own filth like a human pickle, developing a personal aroma that could probably be used as a weapon in times of war. Your clothes are made of rough wool that feels like wearing a hair shirt made from the world's most uncomfortable sheep. You own maybe 2 outfits total, and you wear them until they literally disintegrate, at which point you patch them with whatever fabric you can find, creating a garment that looks like it was assembled by a committee of colourblind people working in the dark. Now let's talk about your social life, which makes being grounded for a month look like an exciting adventure filled with possibilities and human connection. Your entertainment options are limited to whatever doesn't cost money, require literacy, or involve leaving your village, which eliminates basically everything fun that humans have ever invented. The highlight of your social calendar is probably the local market day, which happens maybe once a week if you're lucky. This is where you get to interact with people from other villages who are exactly as miserable as you are, but at least they're miserable in slightly different ways. The market is where you can trade your surplus vegetables, assuming you have any surplus after feeding your family and paying your lord's taxes, for other people's surplus vegetables, creating a thrilling economy based entirely on different types of root vegetables. Occasionally, travelling performers come through your village, bringing with them the exotic entertainment of juggling, storytelling and music played on instruments that sound like someone torturing small animals in a creative way. These performers are about as welcome as a tax collector, because while they provide entertainment, they also eat food and expect to be paid, which means less food and money for everyone else. But you watch anyway, because it's literally the most exciting thing that's happened in your village since that time someone's cow got stuck in the church door. Religious festivals provide another form of entertainment, assuming you consider standing in a cold church for several hours while a priest speaks in Latin about concepts you don't understand to be entertaining. These festivals usually involve some form of communal meal, which is exciting because it means eating food that someone else prepared, even though it's probably just as terrible as what you make at home. The church is the centre of your social life, mainly because it's the only building in the village that's larger than a chicken coop and has a roof that doesn't leak constantly. Church attendance is mandatory, not just because of religious obligation, but because skipping church is the kind of behaviour that gets you labelled as a troublemaker, which is not a reputation you want when your survival depends on community cooperation. Your love life, if we can call it that, is about as romantic as a business transaction, because that's essentially what it is. Marriage is arranged by your parents based on practical considerations like whose family has the most livestock or the least amount of debt. Courtship consists of maybe seeing your future spouse a few times and before the wedding, during which you try to determine if they have all their teeth and whether they smell worse than average, which are basically the only standards you can afford to have. The wedding ceremony is a brief affair followed by a celebration that involves everyone in the village eating slightly better food than usual and drinking ale that tastes like it was filtered through a sock that someone found in a ditch. Your honeymoon is spending your first night as a married couple in the same one-room house where you'll live with your spouse, your children, your parents, and possibly some livestock, because privacy is a luxury that won't be invented until people figure out how to build houses with more than one room. Having children is inevitable, because medieval birth control consists of hoping for the best and praying to various saints who probably have better things to do than worry about your reproductive choices. Your children start working as soon as they can walk, because childhood is another luxury that medieval people couldn't afford. By age 5, they're helping with household chores, by age 10 they're working in the fields, and by age 15 they're having existential crises about whether this is really all there is to life. Education for peasant children consists of learning whatever practical skills they need to survive, which mainly involves farming, basic crafts, and how to avoid getting killed by the various dangers that medieval life throws at you on a daily basis. Literacy is about as common among peasants as smartphones, which is to say completely non-existent. You can't read, you can't write, and you can't do math beyond counting to 20 using your fingers and toes, which is actually sufficient for most medieval peasant financial planning. Let's wrap up this cheerful discussion by talking about what a typical day in your miserable peasant life actually looks like, from your pre-dawn wake-up call to your collapse into unconsciousness at the end of another day in medieval paradise. You wake up when the rooster crows, assuming the rooster hasn't been eaten by whatever predators roam the medieval countryside looking for easy meals. If the rooster has met an untimely end, you wake up when your bladder reaches critical capacity, which happens frequently because medieval ale is basically liquid bread with a slight alcohol content. Your morning routine consists of stumbling outside to relieve yourself in whatever designated area serves as the village bathroom, then splashing some water on your face from whatever container holds the least contaminated water available, which is usually still contaminated enough to make modern health inspectors weep. Breakfast, as we've established, is bread that could double as a weapon, and maybe some leftover pottage that's achieved the consistency of cement overnight. You eat quickly because daylight is precious and your lord's fields won't work themselves, despite your frequent prayers that they might develop some level of agricultural autonomy. The walk to the fields is an adventure in itself, because medieval roads are basically suggestions of where a road might exist if anyone had bothered to actually build one. You navigate around potholes that could swallow small children, animal droppings that create their own ecosystem, and various debris that previous travellers have abandoned after giving up on reaching their destinations. Once you reach the fields, you spend the next 12 to 14 hours engaged in backbreaking labour that makes modern gym workouts look like gentle stretching exercises. You're bent over constantly, either planting, weeding, harvesting, or just staring at crops and wondering why they're not growing faster. The sun beats down on you in summer like a medieval heat lamp designed to test human endurance, while in winter you work in conditions that would make Arctic explorers reconsider their career choices. There's no such thing as weather being too bad to work, because crops don't care about your comfort level. Lunch is whatever you can eat quickly while standing in a field, which is usually more bread and maybe some cheese that's achieved a level of hardness that could be used in construction projects. You eat with hands that are so dirty they've basically become part of the soil ecosystem, because hand sanitizer won't be invented for another 700 years. The afternoon continues much like the morning, except now you're tired, hungry, and starting to question whether this is really how you want to spend the remaining decades of your life, assuming you have any remaining decades, which is statistically unlikely. Evening brings the exciting task of walking home in the dark, because medieval street lighting consists of whatever moonlight manages to penetrate the constant cloud cover that seems to hover over medieval Europe like a meteorological depression. Dinner is more of the same food you've been eating all day, except now it's cold and has been sitting around long enough to attract flies that are probably more nutritious than the actual meal. You eat by candlelight if you're wealthy enough to afford candles, or by firelight if you're not, which means you're basically eating in conditions that would make camping seem luxurious. Your evening entertainment consists of sitting around trying to stay warm while listening to your family members discuss the same topics they discussed yesterday, which mainly involve crops, weather, and various ailments that everyone's experiencing but no one knows how to treat. Bedtime comes early because you're exhausted and there's literally nothing else to do once the sun goes down. You collapse onto your straw mattress, which has somehow become even less comfortable since this morning, and try to fall asleep despite the various sounds of medieval nightlife happening around you. These sounds include other families having the same conversations you just had, animals making noises that suggest they're either mating or dying, and the occasional drunk villager stumbling home while singing songs that were probably inappropriate when they were first written and have only gotten worse with time. Your life expectancy is somewhere around 35 years, assuming you don't die from any of the numerous diseases, accidents, famines, wars, or acts of God that regularly sweep through medieval Europe like a cosmic game of population control. When you do eventually die, which will probably be sooner rather than later, you'll be buried in the village churchyard in a grave marked by a wooden cross that will rot away within a few years, leaving no permanent record that you ever existed. Your life's greatest achievement will probably be surviving long enough to have children who can continue the family tradition of being miserable peasants, passing down the valuable skills of subsistence farming and complaint suppression to the next generation. And there you have it, folks. Your complete guide to living your best life as a medieval peasant, which is to say living your worst life by literally any modern standard of human existence. So the next time you're complaining about your commute, your job, or your living situation, just remember that you could be a medieval peasant, spending your days bent over in a field, eating bread that doubles as building material, and looking forward to a lifespan that would make modern teenagers panic about their retirement planning. Sweet dreams, safe travels, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because apparently, even in the 21st century, we're still asking people to do unpaid labour, just with better production values than medieval feudalism offered.